part of the food system, and it's how do we encourage all of those different parts to join together.
So, Julia, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to end up feeling just completely powerless and overwhelmed by the enormity of the greater picture and situation, and really the call to action is just doing what you can do and keeping it small and local and finding that kindredness within your own community. And those actions, you may just think that growing a bit of food and sharing it within your local neighbourhood is just a small thing, but it all becomes part of this emergent community that I just think within the next couple of years is just going to boom. You can't see it, it's not terribly visible right now, but it's connecting and it's growing and it's networking all of the time. And of course we are working with the most perfect metaphor for creating change, which of course is growing. And so, yeah, I really think that by connecting and recognising that also that every community needs to be able to respond to their needs in their particular manner. My community where I work is entirely different to the community of gardeners that Sarah works with in urban Wellington. But one needs the other, and I'm terribly excited about the connections that we can make and the stuff that we can do, and to me that is just pure wealth. It's like little microbes in the soil at that very, very, very grassroots level, recognising that actually the people with the least amount of wealth and the most impoverished ones are actually at the top making the decisions. So we have all this wealth and incredible stuff at the bottom that, I have such great hope and trust that all of that wealth and all of that generosity and all of that connecting at the grassroots will throw off that terrible impoverishment of our governments.
One more. Alright, so we're going to try and power through the next two questions. We're going to the last one. So the next one, what does removing fossil fuels and other non-renewable resources from food production look like? Sarah, can you speak to that a bit?
Well, I guess, like Tim said when he referred to the United Nations and their map of them have all these little different projects, I thought it was really lovely to tie Auckland to the project up in Auckland, and they produced a map of what a sort of a local community system looks like. And so they've got this map which has got school gardens, it's got bees and churches, it's got fruit trees down our parks, and it's that greater interconnection of all those different parts. So it would be actually we are living in our food systems. They're just they're just integrated into where we are. And that's the vision that I see for it. And so food's just kind of integrated into our education, it's integrated into our socialising, it's integrated into our transport, and it's just part of the environment that we live in.
Does anyone else want to speak to that question for that 60 seconds?
I just, as a sailor, I imagine that our produce that we do export will be sailing around the globe, and it'll be a nice way to transport it the way it used to be.
Sure. Alright, so the next question. How can emerging technologies, GE, artificial meat and dairy, vertical farming, yada yada yada, help or hinder a just food system? Tim?
We've got to be careful there because you just threw a whole lot into one statement. So, with any new technology, it can be used for good or bad. We've seen genetic engineering used for bad a lot lately because a lot of people are using it to capture IP on something that we should naturally get to ourselves, but they've been able to, change a genetic trait and therefore put a patent on it and put a price label on it and stop it regenerating itself, and all of a sudden you've got a product that you're tied into. So, there's great potential for evil, and there's great potential for good. To me, nature is always the master of design, and if we're working to understand nature as much as possible using technology, that's a good use for technology, right? Because the more we understand about nature, the better we can mimic it in our food systems, right? We start screwing with nature, then you're in a different situation. You don't know what to expect. It's very hard to model things like that in a lab. I'm sure Mike will attest to that, right? So, I think you've got to be quite careful. I've seen examples of technology that helps. So you know, back to my original comment, most of our industrial agriculture are essentially linear systems. And we do need a fundamental shift to what I call circular economy type systems, where they integrate not only the farming system, but also all the other elements of that industrial economy together. But if you're still dealing with linear systems, technology can actually help those systems become more efficient in some ways, right? So maybe that's just stepping stones on the path. But I mean, my prime comment here is that, you know, nature is the master's design. We need to be working with nature. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, well, I suppose my comment is that knowledge is much easier to acquire than wisdom. And technology seems to rush ahead because we can do it and we just apply it. And then we see what the consequences are, most of them completely unforeseen. So, well, that's the trouble really. We can engineer things far much more easily we can and understand the consequences of what we do. I mean, good engineering is meant to be evaluating the consequences, but that's probably another question. But I think we've got to step really carefully with technology. I mean, we've really blown it away. I mean, I just find it remarkable that all those good people who did all that science and developed all that technology and applied it to agriculture, I mean, we've got the worst food that people ever eat. It doesn't say a great deal about the way we're finding technology. It's not to say that there aren't the really good technologies, and I think Tim's comment straight away is, well, you know, what are you talking about, how are you doing it, and what sort of approach. I think it's a cultural attitude that's really important when it comes to what's appropriate technology and how we should use it. But your nature does things like really slowly first. I think one of the really important principles of permaculture is slow, small steps, and just get feedback and just work it out first before you try and charge on ahead. You know, we tend to use our technology and charge into it, and that's because we're all just cheap energy. One of the things about not having fossil fuels is we'll actually have to think really carefully what we do, because we won't have all this energy just to go and rush and do it. We might plan things a little bit more, we might think about the consequences a little bit more. Now, technology might be that much better because of it. So, yeah, I think both those questions are really difficult to answer, and fortunately we don't know what the future holds, and I think that's a really good thing. So I really think it's, I just go back and say, well, let's do what we do know how to do well and what does work in with nature and what's regenerative rather than degenerative. Because most of our technology is degenerative. It's heat, beat and destroy. And organic chemistry is the same. And that's a really strange thing. And people might have heard about biomimicry and that sort of approach to technology, which is at least trying to do things at ambient temperature pressures and the way nature does it. And I think there are a lot of things we can learn, and we've just got to say again, as Tim has said, back off that reductionist linear viewpoint of the world and see ourselves as completely immersed in and connected to the environment with it. And then we might understand technology in a better way and apply it in a better way.
Can I just make a comment?
So we've got one last question, and we'll do all the comments and
Okay.
questions, if that's all right. Cool. All right, so this is the final question, and a lot of this you probably have already answered over the course of the night, so perhaps use it as a way of wrapping up your arguments. How is food an important space for resistance? What can we do on an individual and local level?
I was a romantic, I guess you'd say, and I got involved in permaculture because I thought it was a proactive thing to do. And I found that I actually, in my activism, because I was personally focusing on things that were going wrong in the world, I had a very sensitive body, and I became very unhealthy. And it was actually through eating healthy food and understanding my connection to nature that I began to get healthier. It was through running community gardens, I began to understand my connection to community, that I also got healthier again. And so that's where for me, it's that kind of that source of kind of positivity and health. That's how it's always been for me. It's been about a proactivity rather than a reactivity. So and there's a saying, resistance is fertile.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
It's food not bombs, isn't it? Food not bombs slogan.
I'm not sure if there are fancy t-shirts.
Okay.
Well, I'll follow on for that one. I'm saying that some people say about permaculture, the permaculture revolution disguised as gardening. Sort of, yeah, we can turn our back on the system, you know. You don't have to go to the bank and to borrow money, you know. They actually have to twist your arm to take out a loan. And we just got to turn our back, basically, on them. And Bill Mollison, who's really old then, I know, but after the so-called global financial crisis, which was probably just the first flip of it, he said, oh, well, now we're going to have to do banking as well. You know? And I think that it does come back to what my comment earlier is that I think that real change happens in communities at the grassroots level. It's the only way real change ever really happens. The establishment, whatever it was, whether it was the medieval knights and the kings or whatever it is, they never brought about real change. So our establishment might even. So you know, the things you can do that maybe will help the transition, that provided it actually allows communities to actually get on and re-empower themselves and do the growing of their own food for their own people, getting resources for their own buildings, to build their own buildings out of local resources, getting their own energy systems that work in their own locality, and having their own community money systems and being able to be empowered to make their own community decisions. And so it all goes back to the community. And I think we naturally live as a community creature. We are social creatures, but we're creatures of quite small communities, really. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have larger communities, but I think they should be made up of smaller communities nested within larger communities that might be nested within bigger communities. Again, so I'm not saying we should have to give up all the technology or all the really good things about having relationships in a wider body of people and different cultures and that. But I do think that the basic revolution will be because we will say, to heck with you, we're going to grow our own food decently in our own backyard, and we're going to provide our own energy from our own local resources, and we're just going to not let you stop us, basically. And really, they can't stop you because you're not doing anything illegal. Being proactive and doing good things is not illegal, you know. So, you might as well just start doing it.
So far.
I suppose, what can you do at a community at an individual level? Because, you know, we're all aware of some of the grave problems that we're facing, and as individuals, I think it's very hard sometimes to say, what can I do as someone that has to go to a day job and do what I do and feed myself? And I spent a couple of years mulling over this one, and I just finished a paper on this, and I basically came up with 4 conclusions. Conclusion 1 was every one of us needs to protect our natural capital, right? Whether it's a community garden, whether it's a marine reserve, whether it's in your backyard growing some flowers to provide a bee corridor, we all need to do that because that will help us kind of weather the storm in a way, because we've got a storm and we've got to try and fight through that. And then we also need to be very conscious consumers, and that's very, very difficult. But we all need to be, because as individuals, the corporates that create the industrial agriculture, we're their customers in a way. Maybe not for dairy right now because that goes offshore, but you know, for a lot of products, we're conscious consumers. So we do have power to try and drive some of that and facilitate some of that change. I think what Gary was alluding to before, the circular economy, is trying to facilitate moving away from reductionist linear systems. We need to all consider ourselves, everyone on the planet, as part of nature, not just we're thinking about nature. We are part of nature. Our towns are part of nature. We need to start, you know, facilitating the ways that our industrial economies actually work together to actually nurture and create regenerative systems. And I think the last thing is, at a community level, we need to grow our own nutrient-dense food, right? And that actually sets up a ripple effect that will just continue moving. And you know, I think that really gives us something that we can really, as individuals, just grab onto and go for.
I mean, everyone else has covered it much better than I could, but what I was going to say is that I think that knowledge is power, and knowing this stuff is really important, so sharing this information. And the stuff that I've talked about, plus a whole heap more, is at Water Quality NZ, so all one word, waterqualitynz.info.